Okay, so our last speaker is Mike Kraus. Mike is a friend of mine and a colleague from the Public Banking Institute. Mike is also a 1971 graduate of Franklin and Marshall and a founding director of our national organization, the Public Banking Institute, where our national organization is headquartered in Sonoma. And he's also chairman of the Pennsylvania Public Banking Project, which is the co-host for this event. Mike has considerable experience in Pennsylvania politics and is also a international, so what happened? I don't know. But anyway, Mike, it's all yours.
Thank you. It's really fun to be back on this campus. I think I got a good education here. As I walk around the campus, the facilities, go through the course offerings, look at the faculty here, I think you're getting a better one, which is good, but you don't need it, which is where we're in. I will say, by the way, I'd rather anybody here had a better time than I had, but that's another story. Because I have a fraternity brother in the room who actually knows the truth that we're not going to go there, rather than stay on top. Why do I say you're going to need a good education? Well, let's look at what happened in the 40 years or so since I graduated. There has been an enormous change in the United States. I'll go back first to unintended consequences. I worked for a company whose owner was a genius. And standing on the docks in Baltimore in the 50s, he looked at the cargo we brought out of the ship. And he saw the nets going down into the ship, the box being loaded up and taken out, put down. And he said, there's got to be a better way to do this. And he devised and manufactured the first ocean-going container. And it was in service of sea land. It ran from the East Coast down to Taiwan and back. That's what changed America, you could argue, because that container made it possible not only to ship huge volumes of goods, long distance at low unit cost, it made it possible to access cheap foreign labor. And that was the end of it. What began as a trickle became a flood, became a tidal wave of jobs being offshore out of the United States in massive numbers, massive numbers. And it's not just the old dirty fingernail jobs, no. Architectural jobs, legal support jobs, accounting jobs, they're all being, pick up your phone, try to get Apple, and you're talking to somebody in Bangladesh. That's just what it is. That's what it is. If that continues, there will be no, let's put it this way. The United States in the years after the war, the Second World War, by the way, was a kind of a miracle. It was the greatest and most broadly shared prosperity the world had ever seen. I mean broadly shared. People wanted to be a part of that. They really did. It was quite something. That's going away. You hear the term that we're being hollowed out. That doesn't get it. The middle class is being devoured, is what is happening. You're getting an apartheid America. That's what you're getting. We don't need to know all the causes, but the effect of these years of policy, of tax law, of free trade, and what have you, is a very small group of very, very wealthy people and everybody else, served by little lower down rung tier retainers, people like presidents and congresses who do their bidding, that sort. That's what we got, and it's not getting any better. In fact, it's getting worse. Those trends are all just going that way. And one thing you know about established wealth, it's got a logic of its own. Self-preservation just happens. It doesn't matter you're a nice person with wealth. The major function of your wealth is to create more wealth. Well, I was a government major, so I'll do government 101. Political power in any society is a function of wealth. It flows from wealth. When wealth is concentrated, then so too is political power. Wealth is incredibly concentrated right now in the United States, therefore so too is political power. And there's not much will at the national level to change that. In fact, there's almost no will to change that at the national level. You bump up against what are called vested interests, meaning I got mine, I like it that way. I like it that way. And all the tax laws and the investment laws we're talking about facilitate that further concentration of wealth. So, I'd like you students tonight especially to ask yourself a question. What kind of country do you want to raise a family in? Should it be a just country? Should it be a fair country? Should we want an expanding opportunity? I hope your answer is yes. But if it is yes, then the next question is, okay, what are you prepared to do about that? That's really what I'd most like to get out of the seat, is a sense that the young people here are prepared to do something about it. And I'll tell you why. I'm 63. The rule is, more of my life now starts to be behind me than back before me. That's in part, your parents already told you that. That's what happens. You will get older and you'll start running out of time, basically, right? I'm still in the fight, other folks are still in the fight, but you know, it takes young legs and young minds and young hearts to win the future. So what I really want to find out tonight is if you're in this, if you see it as your future, if you're prepared to embrace the responsibilities of citizens in a democracy. Because if you are not, your children aren't going to live in one. It's that close. This is not good. You know, it's really un-American, basically. Okay, what do we do about that? Given that it's quite likely that the federal establishment will do nothing, which is why it's a policy. You understand that. Doing nothing, stagnation, you know, the gridlock, all that stuff, that's a policy. It's called keeping things the way they are. That's a policy. So when they tell you your government's got no policy, no, that's ridiculous. Of course they do. It's keeping things the way they are. That's the policy in Washington. It's not going to change anytime soon. So where does it change? Well, it changes locally. One of the great things about America has always been the phenomenal diversity of the American people and its reason. It's a, you know, de Tocqueville saw it. You still see it. It's traveled around the country. It's incredible diversity. How do you tap into that? How do you harness it? Well, you do things like change investment strategies and make it possible for ordinary people to buy into the local economic development. You do it as the mayor has done. You take things on. You look for new models. But you can do more than that. It comes down, as so much does, to money. Where does the money come from? Well, it can be investment. It can be private equity. But this nation has all kinds of money swirled away in its local, state, and county governments. If you read the budget of the state of Pennsylvania, you think, oh my God, no, that's terrible. But if you read something called the Consolidated Annual Financial Reports, the CAFRs, you will find out that this state sits on any given year on $1 trillion. And it's swirled away in boards and commissions and agencies and authorities. It rolls over from year to year, and we act like it's not there. But of course it is there. You get another education reading the CAFRs. I think it's, we'll back up a second. There's a lot of money out there available at the state, county, and municipal level in this country, and it can be harnessed. We believe in the public banking group that that's a major step that needs to be taken. We need to harness our public resources and put them in our own banks and do what bankers do, leverage those funds and make investments, except the returns come back to the people. The bank's profits come back to the people. Its investments are in the community, working through our local banks. We think that's a smart way to go. Now let me describe how this could actually happen. The county of Bucks, 630,000 people, sits on a rainy day fund, 40 million bucks. It makes 0.29% if it makes that, because its criteria are security, liquidity, return. They don't really care about return. That money's got to be available when they need it. That's got to be safe. So it's parked in some investment someplace. That's enough money to capitalize a bank in this Commonwealth, a bank of $40 million. You leverage that 10 to 1, and you're loaning out $400 million in a population of 630,000 people. That's a very big deal. There is a model for this kind of bank. It's called the Bank of North Dakota. It was formed 92 years ago. Just after the Fed came into being, these really smart farmers said, you know, we don't need more of that. So they made their own bank, and they formed their own bank, and it is a public bank. Over the years now, it holds all the assets of the state of North Dakota. So every microphone in every college university is in that bank's asset base. So they've taken their public assets as a capital base for a bank, and then the bank is run by state employees. They don't get any mega salaries or bonuses, they get civil service salary. It's one office, and they partner with local banks to increase their lending activity. So for example, your local banks have a $5 million limit, and someone says, I want to build a new car dealership, I need $10 million. And he says, can't help you. And he says, oh, geez, too bad, I'm going to Bank of America or Wells Fargo. And the local bank loses a customer. And then the big bank comes in and starts cross-selling and sells the credit cards and everything else, and the local bank business goes down, not in North Dakota. North Dakota, the banks are very strong and very healthy. No failures, almost a very small loss-loan ratio, really well-run banks because they are supported by the public bank. You go to your local bank, they approve your credit, but you need more money they can lend, or they want to buy that you want a lower interest rate for 3 or 4 years. The city bank buys that down to give you a payment you deal with in terms of your cash flow, your business plan. These are things that public banks can do. We started out looking at state level public banks. There's a model in North Dakota, a really good one. And I gave testimony in a couple of state legislatures and realized these bills weren't going to go anywhere because no one had built any foundation. So we stopped doing that. We're talking to cities and counties all across Pennsylvania, to chambers of commerce, to local bankers, to the people under legislators. We'll get around to the state bank sooner or later, but it's really not all important. Any public banks anywhere, county level, city level, Philadelphia, Harrisburg, Reading, Lancaster, Bucks County, Montgomery County, Washington, it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. We just need to get this going and create some more public banks as an alternative to what? To an utterly failed banking system. The private banking system, the Wall Street dominant system, is a complete failure. Leave aside that they needed trillions to stay in business, a pretty good indication of failure. Leave that aside. They don't do the major thing banks are meant to do, which is direct capital and credit into the productive economy. They absolutely fail to do that over and over again. The $23 trillion, who knows what that was, that the Federal Reserve pumped into the Wall Street banks never got past Wall Street. It went right back into the reserve accounts at the Fed to prop up the balance sheets to make money on the interest. It never, ever, ever got loaned out. Maybe some of you young folks here were all of 5 years ago. You were 13 maybe, and not paying attention. Night after night, with the banks are melting down. We were harangued by desperate talking heads. If we don't bail these guys out, credit's going to collapse. You won't be able to get a loan. Smallness will dry up. Unemployment will skyrocket. Yada yada. So we bailed them out, and all those things happened. They just kept the money. They didn't care about your job, your career, your college education, your home, your community. They just cared about the bottom line of their bank. That's what they get paid to do. This is not a surprise. So knowing that, you want to start thinking about other ways to do banking. There's nothing wrong with banking. It's the people running it that are the problem, and how they're running it. So we're posing a new model. You're in Pennsylvania, it's a Commonwealth. Perfect. We want to put the Commonwealth to work for the common good. The first public bank in America was, of course, in Philadelphia. They had a public bank. They didn't have taxes. They loaned money into the community. That came back as interest, and that took the place of taxes in the city of Philadelphia up until Hamilton, the guys ran them out of town. But it was a viable, working concept. So we are recommending the creation of a network of public banks across the nation to harness the credit capacity inherent in the assets of the people. In the assets of the people. And here are the things you will look for in any public bank formation. Caregivers. Someone's got to decide the mission. If you want to have a public bank in your state, city, or county, what do you want it to do? It's important. Then you get to capitalization. Once you've got the mission, you ask yourself, how fast do I want to get there? And you get some idea of how much capital you need. You can decide where to get that capital from. Then you get into governance. No offense to anybody, how to make sure the politicians don't run the bank. You want bankers to run these banks and management. Then you get to three things that are unheard of at Wall Street: accountability, transparency, and risk management. These are unknown concepts on Wall Street. Well, I'm a public bank, you want to make sure these concepts are known. So we're suggesting this evening that as a part of how we relocalize our economy, that apart from the equity portion of this deal, how we get investment, we, citizens collectively, whatever town, city, state you're in, are sitting on substantial public assets that can be used to capitalize the bank, and that can be distributed into the productive economy in cooperation with our local banks. This isn't a retail bank I'm talking about. It doesn't have its own office. It doesn't have tellers. It doesn't take deposits, except for your town. Your town puts money there. They'll do advertising, they'll do marketing, they'll do ATMs. It's a very low overhead deal. It works in partnership with the community banks that already exist. And in North Dakota, the community banks are taking market share back from the big boys. It's that successful. So, I started out remembering what a great time I had at Franklin College. I'm still there. Later on, I'm going to my office at Hildy's. I used to have an office there. And I'll be there shortly to see my seat's still warm. And I asked you, though, to consider what kind of nation, community you want to graduate into. Because the one you're going to graduate into is very different than what I graduated into. In those days, social mobility meant up. Doesn't mean that now. It's down. For the majority of Americans, they're moving down. Middle class is shrinking. The underclass call that is growing, and the top class gets ever richer and less productive. So I suggested that you all need to make some decisions about why you're here and what you do afterwards. And I want you to consider if you're prepared to embrace the responsibilities of citizens in a democracy. Because if you are not, now you and your children will live in one. Thank you.
Okay, well, we've heard 3 presentations now from the mayor of Reading and some of the issues that he's facing, and our friend Mike Schuman here about about local investing, and then about public banking. So now's an opportunity for all of you to ask any questions you might have. So we have a mic here. Walt has the mic, and please.
I'm interested in knowing if any of you have already thought about the Transition Town Transition Initiative and the importance of prices of oil going up and the carbon footprint relief, and do you have any suggestions on how we can get involved in that kind of thing, what we might do locally?
Well, actually, I'm happy to take that question, actually, because I am part of the Transition Town Media. Media is a town outside of Philadelphia, and we happen to have a transition town. A transition town is a worldwide movement that came out of England about 5 years ago, and communities throughout the world and throughout the United States are self-organizing to create the relationships to be self-sustaining. The whole idea being that we cannot count on Washington, and there is a Transition Town USA. If you Google that, you can go to the National Transition Town website, and there you'll find how to begin to organize a transition town. This is something that I've been involved with here in media now it's been going on for about 3 years, and I've been involved for about 9 months, and it's all self-organized, self-generated. We just started a community garden, and we had last Sunday we had a spring equinox celebration. So it's it's a lot of partying. It's a lot of fun. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I went to some thing at the Sustainable Agricultural Conference where a person from media came and made presentations.
That was Marie Goodman.
Right. And we're thinking about doing one in Elizabethtown.
Well, we would strongly encourage that and support that effort. And any other questions for our panelists? Yes.
Who's
I have a question. Okay. I have a question for Mr. Piven, Mike Piven. You mentioned about local banking, and I was just wondering about what the last panelist said. How can you make sure that the local banking or the local bankers are not going to turn into the way Wall Street bankers turn into? I guess. Yes.
The question was a good one. For example, when you suggest have a bank in Pennsylvania, and you want to give those guys a bank, you know, like that. Good question. You have to structure in the firewalls. As for example, in North Dakota, there's a board of governors on their back. There's the governor, the attorney general, and the ag secretary, the big ag state. And they have limited role. They pick the CEO, he runs the bank. They nominate a 7-member banking board to whom the CEO reports, who watch how he runs the bank. But there are several other safeguards built in. One is they're paid a civil servant salary. The governors, they get no more salary. They already got a salary. The employees get paid appropriate civil servant salaries. No bonuses, no commissions, no incentive to take risk. It's not set up to incent gambling. Secondly, it's public, so it is publicly audited. And you see the state banking department, in fact, would audit that bank in Pennsylvania, as well as the Commonwealth's Auditor General. It would get audited twice. So first, you take the incentive out for gambling. There's no reward for doing a credit default swap, none whatsoever. It's straight up lending. Finally, they don't originate the loans. It's not a bank of last resort. You don't get turned down at Fulton Bank and go run to the state bank. Rather, Fulton Bank's got to say, yes, this passes our credit test, but you want more money than we can go, it's above our limit, or you want to buy down the interest rate. Now let's take it to the public bank, and then they do a risk analysis. So in terms of accountability, transparency, and risk analysis, this is a really safe way to bank. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
Thanks. Hi, thanks, all three of you, for great presentations. I have a question for the mayor. You were very articulate in what you were facing and what you're trying to do, and there are other mayors in Pennsylvania and across the country who are facing the same situation. And you pointed out that it was getting people to make decisions to move forward. What can citizens of your city and small business people in your city do to make that decision-making quicker and better?
I think the most important thing is to be able to get in front of the people in the city and begin to articulate what your plans are. I know in Reading, one of the initiatives that I've taken on is getting into the neighborhoods. We've really been going out by way of the faith community, because I have quarterly faith community meetings. Also getting into the organized neighborhood groups, like some of our historic districts have regular organized groups. But getting that message out and making presentations to them, you know, we're probably going to be rolling out the land value tax, because I don't want to see what's happened in the past where the elected officials end up making a decision without the citizens having the knowledge of what the initiative would mean, where they can begin to lobby their council person. But I think that's very much important. And of course, you know, I still have a pretty good email list from when I ran, and we use that. We use that as a tool to get our message out to the people who supported me and voted for me, to also get into the hands of their friends and what have you. So yeah, you've got to be able to get out in front of it.
Thank you.
Thank you. I want to thank the three of you also, as this gentleman did. I think it was really interesting. And I have a question that echoes the question that the young lady there asked about, you know, how do you prevent the local guys from becoming like the big guys, etc. That I have that question for Michael Schuman. Before I get to asking that question, though, I do want to say, Mayor, that we have a center at Franklin and Marshall College you promoted us to a university, but we're only a college, but that's all right.
Same mistake.
Yeah.
My school went from university to a college.
Yeah. But we have something here, it's called the Local Economy Center, that does work on possibilities for local economic development. I think we would love to work with you. You're right up the street, not too far away from here. So, there's research that can be done, initiatives that can be explored. That would make our life a lot more meaningful. So we will be enriched by that. Now, the question that I have is about the question of local. I understand the drive for the local, and I agree with it. I think there is one piece missing, which is the question that the young lady there asked. If you create local businesses, how do you prevent them from going the way of big business? What are the safeguards in place? I mean, I've heard case after case after case of local business being started out with local support, and then it gets sold once it reaches, a certain level of success, gets bought out by a larger company. The mayor was talking about local, businesses providing jobs for local, and then when they become successful, that's when the vultures, come in and snap it up, and then you have no local control anymore. In public banking, because it's a public institution, you can create the firewalls. But how do you create the firewalls against the vultures when you create local businesses if you do not have in place mechanisms that make sure that they are successful as a result of the support of the community, and then they have to remain loyal to the community? I haven't seen anything about local development, local economy stuff that addresses that question, and I would love to have that question addressed, because then I think it would be a really powerful transformative movement. But in the absence of those kind of firewalls that can be put into the forms of business organizations and local community support, it's kind of like a little bit like, we're working to create businesses, and then the success is going to be snuffed up by the vultures. And I would like to make sure that it doesn't go there.
Right, so I have three answers for you. The first answer is antitrust. We have laws that need to be enforced. They're not being well enforced now. Antitrust is really the first firewall against vulture capitalism. The second is competitiveness. And I would argue that local businesses actually are becoming increasingly competitive and larger businesses less competitive. And what we're going to see is exactly, what we're going to see in the next few years is exactly what we saw in 2008, which are major companies on the verge of bankruptcy. And we have to have the courage to let big business fail. And if we let them fail and don't resort to heroic measures to bail them out, I think we will see the competitive advantages of smaller businesses more readily. The third thing I would say is that local investment actually is part of the answer you're looking for. Because you said it yourself, a smaller business is led by an entrepreneur who sooner or later wants to retire. And maybe the family member is not willing to take it on, so that person needs to cash out. How is the person going to cash out? Well, it's true that really the only resort that person has now is to sell out to a larger business. But by creating a whole marketplace for the capitalization of local businesses and the creation of local stock and the creation of local stock markets and local investment funds, we are creating a value for smaller scale selling of businesses to other local owners. So that possibility will be there, which isn't there right now. So there's no perfect antidote to prevent someone from selling out unless you require it from a top-down level. But this at least puts something in place that gives the entrepreneur another option to cash out and keep the company local.
Worker-owned businesses, for example, would do it. That's kind of an answer.
Sure.
I mean, you wouldn't have to rely on antitrust and this and that. That would be an answer. Worker-owned businesses, they're not going to sell their jobs away. Why can't it be local businesses, but worker-owned businesses?
No reason it can't be. It can be worker-owned, it can be public-private, it can be a local stock company, it can be a cooperative. So yeah, there are many models, but all of these models require capital to flow more easily, cheaply, with lower legal bills than they do today.
And a lot of the answer for that is one of the missions of public banking. If we had a network of public banks all around the United States, each of which was focusing on investment opportunities within that particular jurisdiction. So let's say there was a public bank here in Lancaster, and there was one in Montgomery County, et cetera. And they are leveraging those community assets for that area, and that's going to keep those that investment there locally. And the other thing that I'm noticing, and that is a change in the attitude of young people, where and it's more of an attitude of circulation rather than accumulation. It's, the world is more about relationships than it is about, climbing the ladder. So, and hopefully that cultural change will continue. I think you had a question?
Actually, I have a comment and a question. The comment is that from a corporate law standpoint, many states are now authorizing new types of social corporations that you can build those types of transparencies and restrictions into. I worked with Trex to try to work on some of those things here in Pennsylvania. So there are some legal strategies to accomplish that. My question is, with the North Dakota Bank, and I represent a lot of community banks, so I see what type of questions they get from the FDIC about their local lending. And I'm curious as to whether the North Dakota Bank, and I know a little bit about it, whether it's FDIC insured so that it has a federal regulator that's coming in, and how do they take a look at the underwriting process of the commercial loans that the North Dakota Bank participates? And whether that is considered to be an impediment to.
They are not FDIC insured because the state's got $1 million in the bank and FDIC covers $250,000. So they're self-insured in effect. And they're better regulated because the state regulates them. I mean, look at the banks on Wall Street, the Fed regulates them. Doing a great job? Some guy in London blows $9 billion, no one knows about it, they're all covered up anyway, and maybe takes the bank out. Next time he goes down, he takes the bank with him, and are you covered? You all think you've got FDIC insurance. That's an IOU owned by the banks. FDIC is funded by the banks. So they're taking money out of accounts in Cyprus. Is your money safe in their banks in the U.S.? Possibly. Possibly not. Possibly, if the bank goes down, it takes not just your $250, but it takes a city's $40 million. That city's going to be in bankruptcy court for a decade to get 10 cents on the dollar. Now, those are the federally insured banks, so I don't really have a lot of faith in those banks. So one, it's not federally insured, and two, in terms of how they make credit decisions. Like any bank, they have a credit and a risk management committee. It's quite a structured bank. So first you go to your local bank, and you persuade them you're a good credit risk. That's one. Then you go to the public bank, and they must say, for their participation, you're a good credit risk. And there is a very low default ratio among the loans in North Dakota for that reason. There's a double credit vetting process. And by the way, no one gets a bonus or a commission for writing the loan. There's no incentive to take a short term, give you a liar's loan, and take a short term and get it. That doesn't exist. They pay a civil servant's salary, appropriate, of course, with the level of education, but they take the incentive for risk and gambling out of the credit decision process. Does that answer the question?
Yes, so I guess that really the answer is that they're chartered by the state of North Dakota, which means the North Dakota Banking Department has regulatory authority
Yes.
over them, but since they don't take any public deposits, they're not required, as you are in many states, to get FDIC insurance. So there is a regulator, it's a state regulator, and then you have the transparency items that you just talked about.
Yes, they must have their own independent audit, and then the banking commission in the state audits them also. They get a double audit.
So we have time for 2 more questions.
Oh,
Back here.
More than that.
Oh, Hilda,
I'm spending the night one day home.
we're going to Hilda.
I'm good.
How about you?
There you go.
I'm good.
Straight into it, if you would.
Is the public bank involved with,
Could speak a bit closer to you.
is the public bank involved at all with the housing market, or do they leave that?
Yes.
How does that work? Or
The public bank, if the local bank wants to give a mortgage, the public bank can participate in that. But more to the point, the public bank is a secondary market. You were talking about intrastate capacity to build credit. Well, the BND is an intrastate secondary market for mortgages. So your local bank can sell its mortgages to the BND. That gives them more capital to put back into their loan portfolio. The bank can also participate in the bond market. In the market for, you're going to build a stadium or whatever in your city. You want to let bonds. The public bank can bid those bonds down. They'll say, we'll take it for 5% and not 6%. Ooh. Or if they buy the bonds, the interest paid goes back into your bank because you own it. It comes back into your own general fund. So if you consider that interest is at least 40% of any public project, the Bay Bridge in California, what have you, 40% of that is interest cost. If you can push that debt service down, there is substantial potential savings for municipalities. So public bank can function that way too. But yes, they play in the mortgage market. The BND's got the state of a population of 670,000. That's Pittsburgh, roughly. They've got a $2.9 billion loan portfolio circulating in that state of 670,000 people. And each year for the last 10, they've returned $30 million of their profits on a 50-50 split, 50 in the bank, 50 in the public, into the general fund, revenue without taxation. Would you look at some revenue without taxation, Mr. Mayor? Well, there you go. So it has those effects. Now mind you, it's 92 years old. You don't get out the gate doing all that stuff. It goes over time.
a quick comment and a question for you, Mike. For those students here tonight, I have done since 2007 an enormous amount of reading and studying about the problems that we have gone through. And I've heard thousands upon thousands of different answers and solutions for fixing it. The problem that is common with all of those is that none of these solutions offer any way of implementation, of getting them done. What you're hearing here tonight is an effective way of implementing solutions at the local level. And it's really important that you understand that. Then Mike, the question for you is, when I've talked to people about the idea of publicly owned banks, the question hasn't been, are they going to be like Wall Street banks? The question is, are they going to be as corrupt as the people running city council? And how do you prevent that?
And it comes up over and over again, and I have addressed it, but I'll address it again. When you look at setting up a bank of this nature, here are your things you'll look at. Mission, that's number one. What do you want it to do? Number two, capitalization. How you fund the bank. Then three, governance. Then four, management. Those are two different things than accountability, transparency, risk management. The model we suggest is that elected officials must ultimately take responsibility, or you have no accountability. To whom is the Federal Reserve accountable? Nobody. Nobody. This was, by the way, there must be some gov majors here, this was the height of progressive government, Woodrow Wilson. We're going to take those nasty politicians out of it and let the bankers run the banks. That worked out well, didn't it? I mean, you know, you can't have it both ways, people. If you want to live in a democracy and you want some accountability, then you've got to make elected officials accountable. If you don't want to give the experts to run the show, then you have no effective control. You surrender that, like the Federal Reserve. Gone. So, you know, it's unfortunate, but it's not a perfect world. So we think that people who are elected, who are accountable to voters, who can be removed, need to be ultimately accountable. But the role is limited. In our case, we're saying the role is to hire the CEO, then he does the hiring and the firing, or his staff. This is not a patronage machine, where, cousins and uncles and brothers get jobs, not that. And secondly, they have a role year to year in adjusting the mission of the bank. Within the parameters, North Dakota, they say, the legislature says, this year we want a 70-30 split, or this year we want a rural housing program, or this year we want a biotech investment program, or this year. That board, responsible to the citizens, makes that call. So we limit the role of the governors and separate it from management. The managers are pros, the bankers. They're guided by a banking board, which the government selects, of course. Of course they do. But then they drop out. So you limit the role of governors from the management of the bank on a day-to-day basis. Really not all that complicated. That's the point to make, by the way. This is new in Pennsylvania because I've been thought of it since Ben Franklin's time. But this model is working in North Dakota. So we're not talking about reinventing the wheel. We're just going to roll it down to Pennsylvania and North Dakota, basically, and modify it as needs be. This is not complicated.
Another question here.
If we've got the model already, can't we go find somebody with a big bankroll to kick in $40 million and start the model?
Well, that's us. Our cities, states, towns have that money. It's our money already. It's in different places. It's in sinking funds. It's in rainy day funds. It's in pension funds. Someone mentioned pension funds. There's nothing to stop unions from taking a position in the bank. In Pennsylvania, I mentioned the budget and the CAFRs, the consolidated annual pension reports. You read the CAFRs, and it talks about this state's 2 employee pension funds. You read the footnotes down on page 180. It's wonderful. And it talks about how they defend against the risk of doing business in 30 foreign currencies. Now take that one in. Your paycheck, the deduction, is not only not being invested in Pennsylvania, it's not being invested in the United States. Think about that. Meanwhile, your pension fund is getting 4%, at least 8%. The Bank of North Dakota returns 17 to 25% on equity year in and year out. It's a great place to invest union funds. And there's a union guy right there. And unions, the decline of the middle class is concurrent with the decline of unions. You don't get the connection, you're not paying attention. Really. Unions are vital in good jobs and health care and benefits. They don't have a lot of friends right now, but they got money. You can acquire friends with money, you know. And so if unions start to place some of their abundant capital, 20%, in facilitating local bank, public bank creation in other communities, and then they get their piece out, it's a great way for unions to make some new friends with their money.
If I could just add one other thing, why is it not happening? There are opponents, and the opponents are the big banks. And they, there was a strong movement, for example, in Massachusetts to do a public bank, and the Boston Federal Reserve commissioned a study on public banking and who is on the board of the Federal Reserve in Boston, all the big banks. And guess what the study said? Oh, well, it'll really dilute the competitive atmosphere of banking if we have public involvement in all this. So just prepare for blowback in all of this. I mean, there was a time when public banking was, oh, it's just North Dakota, below the radar screen, but now there are movements all across the country. And so it's going to be a big fight, and it's worth winning.
Talking about pension funds, and something that comes up is the ERISA rule and the prudent man rule. If you're trying to go to a local municipality, township, county, state, how do you get, what argument can you use there?
Well, a lot to be said about that. First of all, if 2.6% is the rate of return that Wall Street is getting every year, I don't know what prudence means if that's your only alternative. So some of this just requires education of pension fund managers. But I also tend to believe that they are going to be the last people we turn around. And in a way, the way that I see the local investment universe developing is that first we have to make it cheaper and easier to issue securities, which we're on the verge of doing. Then we have to create, as Trex was trying to do, local stock markets. That creates liquidity. Once you have liquid markets, we can create funds. Now, those funds may not all be in the shape of of mutual funds. But once you have mutual funds with local securities and a track record, then we can have that conversation with the pension fund manager. I really think you have to kind of go through this order, because you can't have a stock market without securities. We don't have the securities yet. You can't have an investment fund of local securities until you have liquidity. So that's why we need the stock market. And I think we're not really going to be able to turn around the pension fund managers until we have a critical mass of performance to point to.
Yeah. So, more quote right here.
So we've spent a lot of time talking about why the shift to localities would be really good for Americans, but how does the U.S. sort of go about this as a unilaterally? Because we are, so interconnected to the international community. Switching over to local stock exchanges and local businesses doesn't mean that big corporations aren't going to exist in the rest of the world.
All right. Go ahead. I just grabbed whatever mic is there. Not sure where. This one's going to China. So a lot to be said. So the reason I was in Australia is that it was the second annual conference of localization organizers around the world. So there is an emerging critical mass of people with the slogan, think globally, act locally, and who believe that local self-reliance is the key to global prosperity. And part of the purpose of building this international network is to share public policy innovations like local stock markets, to share business innovations that enable local businesses to be more competitive, that share grassroots movements and broad education. And I think that's what's going to make the difference. Nothing is going to eliminate global companies. But if we simply get rid of all of the laws that really are unnaturally making global companies more competitive. I mean, I pointed out just one of them, which is the fact that our securities laws have meant that all of our long-term savings is capitalizing global business. That's a subsidy. Got to get rid of that. You get rid of it, then we're going to see a real deflation of global businesses. And these kinds of securities laws exist all over the world. So, before and after this conference in Australia, I was talking, with groups like this up and down the coast of the country, trying to tell them about changes we made in our securities laws to give them some blueprint for how they can change their securities laws. And I think this unnatural overfinance of global business that has happened worldwide is about to be unplugged.
I'll make another comment too. Public banking is new here, but in the rest of the world, it has roughly 40% of the market. China, Japan, Germany, Australia, New Zealand, South Africa, Brazil. This is not a new concept. And these are the economies that didn't melt down when Western Europe and the US did, because they weren't tied into all private banking industry. So the public bank was counter-cyclical. In North Dakota, they said, quote unquote, when the crash hit, they just kept the credit flowing. In 14 other states, 49, it just dried up. It kept flowing in North Dakota. That was the key. They kept the credit flowing. So in the BRIC nations, which are doing rather well, we're looking at a revised downward estimate, a revised downward estimate for U.S. growth. It's almost not growth. That's not what's happening outside Western Europe and the U.S. That's not what's happening in China, Brazil, Argentina, Chile, that's not what's happening there. They're doing rather well. Not perfectly, of course, they suffer too, because they're not buying as much stuff anymore. But on the main, they've weathered this crisis far better than we have, because they had a counter-cyclical credit agency active in the economy, keeping the credit flowing into the productive economy.
We have another question.
Just two very brief comments. Thank you. I want to underscore the point that Mike Schuman made, that we have big interests that don't want what we want to happen. Community-owned broadband is the most efficient, most cost-effective, most easily to change technologically. 19 or 20 states have outlawed it because of lobbying by you-know-who. My second comment is your comment, sir, about how can we trust government, local government, to do things right. Well, I'll tell you this anecdote. I live in Washington, D.C., and have for many years. And when I was young and naive, I looked at the solid waste system and saw that if the city controlled the transfer stations, not only would the city save a fortune, but businesses would save a fortune because the cost of handling this stuff went down. So I made a recommendation. It was in the 1990s. Not that old. 1990s.
Oh, you're not.
And people laughed at me. Neil, you trust the local government to do that? Well, it's now, it was 20 years later, and that's exactly what Mayor Williams did to get the year. And the city, it's been terrific, and this is relevant, because Mayor Vaughn Spencer is looking at the garbage system in the same way that we would like him, and all of us would like to see local control over those very valuable resources. Thank you.
How does microfinancing fit into your model? The question is microfinancing, which is...
From my perspective, take a city like small city, Pennsylvania. We tend to think of small businesses statistically. That means 500 employees. That's not a small business. New Jersey has 6,000 corporations. 23,000 are 3 employees or less. That's where there is tremendous potential for growth and development. And what a public bank could do is work with, again, the community banks to identify those small businesses that can benefit from credit. Michael's talking about the equity side of this. They can certainly benefit from investment, but they can also benefit from a credit injection. The two can go hand in hand. You'll have to come with a good business plan. Now what's happening is, so like rating, there are incubator plans that prepare people to run a small business, help them understand that kind of job. The missing component is, where's the money going to come from? We were meeting in Philadelphia the other day, and they went through program to program where they can get you the technical support and the bureaucratic support and the facility acquisition, and then the money, the money to start your business up. Where's that going to come from? So it's possible that a public bank working through community banks can have a major impact if that's the mission you choose. And again, to come back to the beginning, we go out around advising a public bank. I don't tell people what it's for. Mission is defined locally. I don't care whatever that's your call. It's your setup, your city, your town, whatever. You pick the mission, but it must be addressed. And once you've got your mission in place, you go from there. Once you know what it is you want to accomplish, then you go forward. It could easily be micro and small business financing, or it might not be. It depends on what your municipality or government wants to do.
Okay, I think we have time for one more question. And any other burning questions? Well, I'd like to, thank Mayor Spencer and my friend Mike Kraus and Michael Schuman for a wonderful program. And let's give it a host, Sean Flaherty and F&M University. We have some information about public banking outside if you're interested.